Hello and welcome to road.cc. Rapha have just announced the creation of their foundation, a funding source for charities around the world that aim to increase participation in cycling. It follows on from their roadmap, which went in depth into the problems facing the professional side of the sport and how these issues could be solved. We're going to chat to Simon Mottram, Rapha's founder, about the new foundation, its aims, and how cycling needs to change.
Firstly, I'll just say thank you to Simon and Rapha for agreeing to chat with us. We're going to be talking about the new Rapha Foundation. And I guess we should just kick off. Simon, would you tell us a bit more about the Rapha Foundation and who it's aimed at?
Of course. The foundation, well, for starters, it's the first time we've done something like this, and 15 years in, it's pretty exciting to be able to do it. It comes from our overall mission as a company, which is to make the sport more popular. And for the first number of years, we tried to do that through better products and better experiences, and then we expanded into our clubhouses and our membership and all sorts of stuff with pro teams. And it's always the thing that we're trying to push, is to make the sport more exciting and appealing so that more people ride their bikes. And the shareholders, Tom and Stuart Walton, came to me last year and said, listen, it'd be really good to help you set up a foundation to promote the mission of the company, which is to make cycling the most popular sport in the world, which is a pretty amazing thing for a shareholder to offer, rather than just driving us to make more profit, which is what some shareholders would do. And so this is something which will last for a number of years, probably indefinitely. And each year they're putting in $1.5 million of their money, and we will seek to add more to that over time, to put into grassroots of the sport to help promote a kind of ladder up into the professional sport and make the sport more popular. So it's a pretty grandiose thing. It's got a big ambition. It's not really focused on any particular audience. We're doing it because we believe in it, and we're doing it because we believe in the sport. So it's not a kind of CSR initiative or something which is, a marketing ploy, although Rapha often gets accused of doing things through clever marketing, but it's not really that at all. It's putting our money and our shareholders' money where our beliefs are, which is that the sport's amazing and we should get more people involved. So initially,
Okay.
Maybe that makes sense in terms of the audience. It's as interesting for our customers and our members of staff around the world as it is to the general public. It's about getting behind our mission and getting more people involved.
Okay, so I guess the kind of traditional way that a brand or a company would want to get involved in cycling would be to sponsor a team, and obviously you guys have EF Education First that you're supporting this year, and for the next few years. We've seen that you've supported the likes of Rapha Focus, Cyclocross Team, Rapha Condor Sharp. Why not just create another developmental team?
It's a good question. We have Canyon SRAM as well in women's field, which
Of course, yeah,
is important for us. I think that comes back to another reason why the foundation is as it is. It's there for our overall mission, but you're probably aware that we published the Rapha roadmap in recent months, after 18 months or more of research into the professional sport. So that's really been leading where we focus our attention for the next few years. And that Rapha roadmap set out 15 or so critical things that we felt had to change. One of those was the way that people do teams. So hence our approach to EF is very different to our approach that we did for Sky. And it's much more about creating characters and bringing in more excitement into the racing and an alternative calendar so that we can attract more fans. So that was taking the roadmap as a kind of to help us navigate where to spend our money. And actually the foundation is the next step on that. So we've set up the foundation for the long term, but when we were discussing, well, where do we focus it for the next few years, the roadmap helped us to focus that investment. And what we realised was from the roadmap there's no clear ladder from starting to race or starting to ride, and the more talented younger riders, how do they get on the ladder to becoming a professional and ultimately to succeeding at the top level? It depends often on who your club is, or knowing about clubs, or where you're born, or who you know, or whether your parents have any money. It's all a bit too haphazard. And what that means is that we don't have a consistent throughput of talent going into the sport. So that's where we're focusing the foundation for the first few years of its existence, is building that pathway and building that ladder for the next generation of racers. We felt that's a better way than just launching some more teams, because we already have a really high-profile men's team, a really high-profile women's team, and we do support in an ad hoc way some other athletes and teams locally. But actually, we need to sort of step back from that and look at the throughput of talent into those teams, and that's where we think we can make the biggest impact.
Okay, so would you say that this is more of a kind of a community-focused drive than, you know, the pro teams?
Well, we want to make the pro teams very community-focused. I think that's one of the problems of professional racing, is that the teams are often divorced from the fan, and certainly divorced from local communities. But that aside, yes, I mean, the foundation is very focused on local communities. So the first awards have gone to, which we're announcing this week, have gone to US organisations, pretty much covering the US, different parts of the US. The second round of awards, which will happen at the end of this year, is going to look at the UK, Europe and Asia Pacific, which are the other areas where we have significant business and communities. And they'll be looking for organisations in those places, because it'll help our customers and our members and our staff to get involved and to feel real engagement with that grassroots. So it is more community focused, I suppose, but I do think teams have to become more like communities and have to think that way, not just about winning races if they're going to have long-term value.
Yeah, I was looking at the Rapha Cycling Club, and the actual kind of group, call it community, that you've got with that is huge, and it, like you say, it goes worldwide. How are you going to try and get those members involved in this foundation?
Yeah, it is huge, and it's an active community, so it's not just people who've signed up and get discounts or following somebody on social media. It's a real community where people do actively ride together and spend time together and build friendships. And we absolutely, they're our number one audience. We really want them to get involved with the foundation. They will get involved in a number of different ways, and it depends where the grantees, the actual organisations we're supporting, how close they are to where the members are. But I imagine that it'll involve things like getting involved in events, doing their own fundraising activities, helping to promote the grantees, and getting involved in that way. Initially, we've got to be a little bit careful because of the way the charitable vehicle in the US has been set up. There are certain things we can't immediately do that we're looking at ways to allow. So we can't do checkout giving, for example, immediately. And we're working with lawyers to find a way of making that easy. And that will be done as a sort of country by country basis. So there's a few logistical issues to getting people to dive in and help. But over the course of this year, we're going to free all those up so that members can absolutely get very close to it.
Okay. And I was reading about the first 5 grantees that you've announced in the US, and it seems like there's a really good spread between kind of community-based projects for kids and then that kind of next step up with more kind of race-focused setups. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of mix something that you'd like to replicate here in the UK?
I think that's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to replicate. It's one of the reasons we started with the US, is that there are so many organisations approaching us or that we'd invited to propose. There are so many more of those in the US than there are in places like Asia, that it allowed us to be very clear about the criteria that we wanted to judge their submissions by, and that was that we wanted to make sure there was good representation of children, good representation of women's focused organisations. We wanted it to not just be road, but to be mountain bike and cross and track. So we managed, as you say, we managed to get a really nice spread, and we're hoping that by launching it with these first 5, we can set the standard so that we get many more submissions from the rest of the world over the rest of this year for the second awards in November, December.
Okay. And kind of looking more towards the type of organisation that you're going to hopefully support, one of the biggest barriers in the UK to just getting people on the roads is poor infrastructure. Are you looking to maybe work with some charities that campaign for safer roads?
Not initially. I mean, there are loads of barriers, and when we first sat down and thought, how do we focus the foundation for the first few years, we looked at things like infrastructure and lobbying. We looked at safety. We looked at women specifically, because there's definitely more work to be done to get more teenage girls and young women into cycling. And we looked at grassroots racing. We looked at the whole gamut of barriers, and oh my God, there's a lot of work to do. But we felt it was quite important to really focus, because then you have the total becomes more than the sum of the parts, and it'll be easier for people to understand the remit of the foundation if we focus on one thing. So that's why for the first few years we focused on the next generation of racers. We're really passionate about safety and infrastructure as well, and we need to get there at some point, but we're starting with that racer focus.
Okay, I'm imagining you can't name drop anyone that you're looking at, but I'll ask anyway. Are there any organisations that you're kind of keen to nudge towards becoming a charity so that you can actually then go and work with them?
I can't give the names, but you could probably figure it out. Yeah, there were some that we invited to submit from the UK, one of whom is definitely a very well-known organisation supporting young racers as they go abroad. I won't mention the name. Yeah. They weren't set up in quite the right way as a charity, which meant that they didn't fall under the remit of this foundation. So we're hoping that with a little bit of change over the summer, we'll be able to support them later in the year if they're still keen.
Okay, cool. So the roadmap that you published kind of took us all a bit by surprise, really, in how thorough it was. And it really focused on pro cycling. There's a very interesting section of the roadmap that looks at fan engagement. How do you see the grassroots development of the Rapha Foundation aiding the professional side of the sport, and actually vice versa as well?
I think there's two different things actually in that case, in that sense. I think the foundation will help the professional sport by connecting this ladder back to original talent, and we'll have a much bigger pool of people who could become successful in the future. So I think it will help the sport in that way, just in terms of raw material of great athletes. I don't think it's directly going to lead to fan engagement, although some of the characters, some of the young athletes that come through some of these organisations and end up on a pro team, a world tour team, maybe there's an even better story there, because they start out in something like NICA or Boulder Junior Cycling or Star Trek, and then they end up riding for Canyon SRAM or riding for EF. That would be a wonderful story, but that's not actually specifically what the foundation is about. I think the other things we're doing with EF and Canyon SRAM around media and content is much more focused on, and the alternative calendar that we're trying to get the riders to do, that's more about fan engagement than the foundation.
Okay, fair enough. And that roadmap highlighted some very, what I see as quite sensible changes, like, a slightly altered calendar that's maybe easier to follow. If you could instantly change one thing this year, what would it be?
Yeah, there are quite a few things to change, and we're just a small company, mainly selling clothing and experiences and services. There are only certain things that we can influence, and we're trying to influence whatever we can that's within our remit. But if I had a magic wand and I could suddenly be an omnipotent ruler of the sport with anything being possible, the one thing I'd want to change is the calendar. And this is from somebody who's completely in love with the history of the sport, and I watch bike racing every day, and I probably watch more obscure races than most people that would be listening to this, and love them. But notwithstanding that, I just think the biggest barrier is it's a massively confusing, complex, sort of sprawling sport that just doesn't make sense to people. And it would just add so much if there was a sense of progression through the season, a sense of who's winning and who's losing, a bit more of a week-to-week drama based on the same characters coming to perform. And I don't think it's that difficult to do. It's just very hard to do if you're Rapha. So,
yeah, I completely agree. I mean, there's no structure to the season really, apart from spring classics and then into kind of, grand tours. But if you just jump in halfway through, there's no kind of like league table, and there's no story plot line that you can instantly sell the sport to someone. But yeah, like
it goes on. I love the fact there's only a month where I don't really watch racing, but for the athletes and for the general fan, it's just too big. It's too much. And I think it's not beyond the wit of man to change it. We've suggested in the roadmap one way of doing it, but I'm sure there are many other ways of making it easier to understand and more exciting.
Yeah, I think there's such easy wins. Like in cyclocross, there's the DVV trophy. I'm going to get my sponsors wrong now. The Soudal Classics trophy. I'm not sure. But they have little leagues within stuff, and the commentators are able to kind of talk about what's been happening around there, which usually starts and ends with, Mathieu van der Poel's winning. But yeah, it's slightly more interesting. And my final question, actually, before you go, is in the last few years, there's been some more kind of interactive fan engagement that I think really Orica Green Edge, as they were then, and now Mitchelton Scott, and you guys are doing with EF. They're creating these great videos, but the videos from the Grand Tours have been shortened because the organisers refuse to allow the teams to actually film any of the actual racing. My question would be to you, does this determination to kind of control access to the racing, does that need to change as well?
Yeah, 100%. It's ridiculous, isn't it? I think it's probably a bit like the Tory party at the moment. There's lots of people fighting to keep control of their little slice of a small pie, and yet doing nothing about making the pie bigger or actually sort of addressing the bigger issues. And most race organisers, I'm afraid, are falling into that trap. It doesn't serve the sport very well long term. It doesn't help the fan. It doesn't help any of us. And so, yeah, we're having to run through hoops just to sort of recreate content and skirt around the fact we can't show live racing content. If the organisers themselves were doing a brilliant job of creating episodic media content around their races, then we'd all just sit back and go, fantastic, fill your boots, because we're just fans at the end of the day. But they're not doing that. I can't. Maybe some are somewhere, but I can't think of anybody who's doing a great job of that.
So no, the Tour is particularly bad as well for their race highlights. They are awful.
Yeah, they're good friends of ours. I couldn't possibly comment, but yeah, I don't seem to be doing it. So I'd love them to do it, and if they can't do it, then it would be a brilliant sort of injection of excitement, wouldn't it, if they just made the stuff open source and allowed people to do with it what they want. They've already signed their media deals, so they're probably already getting money. So let everyone create more interest around that subject. Maybe it's a little bit simplistic on my part, but I think that would go a long way.
Quite right. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for talking to us, and good luck with the foundation. Can't wait to see which kind of organisations you are able to bring on board.
Well, that's great. Thanks for giving us a chance to talk about it. And if there are organisations that you or your readers think are really interesting for us to talk to, then by all means send them through.
Definitely. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks, Liam.